we continue in our endeavor to reach an understanding of the nature of emptiness, knowing that this state of emptiness is another way of putting our destination. And our destination, just to put it in words, maybe you have other words to describe it, is a state of an absence of illusion. To arrive at that state of absence of illusion, all the conditioning of the mind has to be emptied, so that we can experience ourselves, that mind itself has no existence. Only then can we know that there can be no further illusion in our life. So all of the stories that are told over these many years are for the purpose of dismantling, unraveling the mind, its contents, so that we can experience that emptiness. Over these last days, and for many years, it's been said oftentimes that we have to be divine scientists, divine alchemists, divine physicists. And we know what physicists do. They love to make equations. So the stories over the last weeks have created an equation. This plus this plus this equals. And what's arisen out of those stories have been three elements: humility, surrender, and faith. Humility plus surrender plus faith. But so far we haven't come up with what this equation is equal to. So today's story gives us the answer to that equation. So let's see. It's a story that's been told before, but let's see if it evokes for us what it is from our experience, because we know humility. We've been humbled. We know surrender. We would not be sitting here if we were not in a state of surrender. And we know faith. What do they equal? So the story is in a time long ago when there was a certain child born to the wife of a sultan, and she proved to be a very meek, humble, and extraordinarily beautiful child, and she had a shining countenance, so much so that her mother called her Lahab. Now Lahab means flame, and this is what she was considered to be. But because her father, the sultan, was somewhat of an enlightened man, he allowed his daughter to be educated. But of course it was an education in the faith and the dogmas and tenets of the day. So Lahab was sent to a certain sheikh each day to study the holy book and learn the teachings of state. Now, one day when Lahab was sitting with the other students in class, the sheikh made an announcement. He said, "Whoever will bring me a succulent stuffed goose tomorrow will win the prize." Now all the students agreed that they would fulfill his wish, and they went off. But all the students forgot, except Lahab, who went back to her mother and stated the request of the sheikh. And immediately her mother had the cooks prepare a succulent stuffed duck for the sheikh. And the next morning, her mother woke her early and said, quickly take this goose to your sheikh before the other children arrive. So very quickly, Lahab prepared herself and put on her shoes, but mistakenly she put on a gold shoe and a silver shoe, and then she ran off to the house of the sheikh. But when she opened the door, a very shocking sight greeted her, because there, hanging from the roof of his abode, was a horse, and the sheikh was tearing at its flesh with his teeth. As Lahab was horrified, and in herself she thought, oh no, protect me, my teacher is a ghoul. And she quickly ran out of the house, picking up what she thought was her shoes, but in her haste leaving her silver shoe behind and only taking her gold shoe. When she got home and she went to bed that night, she dreamt that standing beside her bed was her teacher, the ghoul, and the ghoul said to her, Lahab, what did you see today? And Lahab in her dream said, I saw my teacher in prayer. The ghoul said, tell me the truth, or I will eat up all of your father's camels. And very quietly in her dream, Lahab said, well, eat them then. And the next day, all of her father's camels had disappeared. Day after day, night after night, the ghoul came to Lahab. The next time, asking the same questions and receiving a response very similar from Lahab, then do it. Her father's sheep, his warehouses, his land were all taken. And then the ghoul came to Lahab and said, tell me, why did you take the gold shoe and leave the silver, and what did you see? Lahab responded, I saw my teacher with the holy book on his lap, deep in study. Tell me the truth, said the ghoul, or I will eat your mother and father. Eat them then, said Lahab. The next day, her mother and father had disappeared. Lahab was now an orphan. Her lands, her father's lands, were now rendered dust. She had nothing. She had nowhere to go. In desperation, she placed the hem of her gown in her teeth, and she ran towards the east, knowing that in the west was a vast desert. But as evening fell, she came to a caravan of potters who were taking their enamel pots to market, and she fell exhausted. In the night the ghoul came and again asked her the question, what did you see? Tell me the truth, else I will destroy all of the vessels of this caravan. said Lahab responded, "Do I value these vessels more than I value my mother and father?" The Ghul came and shattered every vessel that the potters had in their camp. Lahab staggered down the road until again she came to another caravan, this one of those growers of olives who were taking their skins of olive oil to market. Again that night, after she'd fallen in exhaustion, the Ghul came again, asking the same question, threatening the same. "Tell me the truth," said Lahab, "else I will destroy all of the goods of this caravan." Again she responded that she had seen her master sitting in prayer with the holy book on his knee. The Ghul came and destroyed, letting all of the olive oil flow into the sand. After this, Lahab knew that she could not remain in the world of men. So, staggering, she entered a vast forest, and whenever she came across some herbs or little pool of water, she very gratefully gave thanks to the Lord. But it so happened that while she was there, the son of another sultan was hunting, and by happenstance came across this bedraggled creature, who he saw to be a maiden. He immediately put her on the back of his horse and took him back to his palace, where he put her in the care of his sister. Well, as soon as she was bathed and fed, her beauty was restored. The shining presence that she was revealed, and the sister thought that she would make a very suitable bride for her brother. So she went to the sultan with the suggestion, but her father said, "We know nothing of this girl. Surely you cannot imagine that I would offer my son to be married to someone other than that of someone who is of noble birth." But the sister was wily, and she decided that she would test Lahab. And so she played a game with her, and she said to Lahab, "If you were betrothed to a prince, what would be the dowry that you would demand?" "Oh," said Lahab, "don't ask me that question, because the price would be greater than all the camels that could be gathered in all of the kingdoms of all of the lands." Well, the sister was delighted. She went back to her father, the sultan, and she said, "Father, certainly no one would dare to demand such a dowry if they were not of noble birth." So the sultan, accepting this, had a great feast, and the prince and Lahab were married. And very soon afterwards, she gave birth to a beautiful son. But the night after the birth of her son, the Ghul came again, asking her the same questions, and she said, "Do I value this child more than I valued my mother and father?" And the next day the child had disappeared. Now there was rumor abounding in the palace that Lahab herself was a Ghul. But her husband, the prince, would have none of it, and said, "My wife will give birth to another child." And so she did. After 40 days of fasting and cleansing, she was pregnant once again, and gave birth to another beautiful child. But again, on the night after the birth, the Ghul came again, same question, and the same answer. So the child disappeared. Now not only was it a rumor, but of course it was abounding in the palace that indeed this woman was a demon, a Ghul. But again her husband would have none of it. And again Lahab became pregnant, and again the same thing happened. The Ghul came, the child disappeared. But this time the sultan himself had his son bound with ropes so that he could not interfere, and messengers were sent out into the town to bring wood, kindling, and all things that would make a conflagration. When all of these things were gathered, and the town's people were all around, Lahab was dragged out to be thrown into the fire. But just as she was about to enter the flaming mound, it was noticed that there was a cloud of dust approaching, and when everyone turned, they could see that it was 4 horses. On the lead horse was a man of stature, with a turban that was like the tray of a sultan's feast, his white beard flowing behind him. On the other 3 horses rode 3 children. The old man jumped down from his horse and went over to Lahab and kissed her between her eyes, and turned to the crowd and said, "Anyone who touches this maiden will have their blood spilt. She is like my daughter. I am her teacher. She has had all of her life taken from her. She has endured hardship and tribulation and loss. Anyone who surrenders to the power of God with patience reaps their reward." And then he turned to Lahab and said, "These are the children who were taken from you. Everything has been restored to what it was. Go, your mother and father await you." Of course, we know the end of the story. There was great rejoicing, and for the remainder of her days, Lahab shone brightly the flame that she was, and lived happily with her husband, who ruled, and her children. These 3 qualities, if we can call them such, humility, surrender, and faith. Plus equals. What is it that city Lahab represents for us? What is it that's evident in this story that gives us what equates to these three? Humility, surrender, faith. What is it about you now, having in your spiritual journey needed of necessity to be humbled, to learn surrender, and to have faith and trust? What has it brought you? What is it about Sit Lahab that was present because of these three? What has it wrought, or what have they wrought in you? What does a flame do?
Well, it appears that the actual experience that Sid Lahab had with what she saw and what she said were really different. And so she saw the ghoul, but then she said he was sitting in meditation. So perhaps things aren't as they seem.
Right.
And if things aren't as they seem, you require humility and surrender to see the truth as it truly is.
That's right.
And then when you see the truth as it truly is, then you have faith in that and you keep going with that.
Okay, so it equals what?
Good question.
God's heart.
Right.
Equals truth, perhaps.
Right.
Maybe. Perhaps just continuing on. Just continuing on.
So it seems we leave this unanswered for the moment. Maybe there's another story. Who knows? Thank you.